All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of No Nonsense Spirituality with me, Britt Hartley, and Bill Reel of the Almost Awakened podcast. And we are joined today by Austin DiValentino, who is a content creator that I saw pretty early on when he was a really small-time content creator. And I messaged him and I really loved his content. And early on, I said, like, you're going to blow up and you don't know it yet. And then he did. And I'm excited to bring him onto the channel. He is really doing well, has a large following on Instagram, where he explores topics in philosophy, religion, literature, and critical thinking. And last time I talked to him, he considered himself an atheist, but he's been shifting with that word. So we're going to get into that.
Mhm.
And he's just really interested in questions around religion, morality, and meaning. And I've just been loving his content and had to have him on. So, Austin, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I'm really excited. I have other questions of things that I would love to pick your brain about, as you spend so much time in so many philosophy books. But what I actually really want to go into more than that is like the story about how you got here. How did you
Mhm.
get to be someone who comments so much on morality and religion, but more in kind of an atheist space? And I just really want to get a sense of your story. So start us off at the beginning and take us on a journey here.
Sure. So, of course, going to the content stuff, it's going to start with the motivation, which started very young. I was a strange kid. I always loved the folklore, myth, even religions that I saw very similar to mythologies. And there was nothing particularly special in regards to a philosophical sense. I just had a draw to them. I could not explain it. I didn't care to explain it. I just loved them. And as I got older, my grandmother, who was a regression therapist who practically raised me, started to introduce me to philosophical themes, Dostoevsky, some Nietzsche, and I started to really work through difficult questions. And I started to wrestle with them further once I hit my teen years, and I wanted to be a little rebel and act it out. I come from a rough childhood, to say the least, and so you had no choice but to wrestle with them, and so I did. I went, homeless voluntarily. I ran away from home when I was 16 years old. I dropped out of high school when I was 16. Never went back to high school, got my GED, never went back home, uh, and so when you're in a 2007 Buick in late fall and it's cold and your car doesn't have heat, you're gonna start asking some questions. And so I did. And it led me ultimately to go to college. I got my GED, went to college, and I just kind of stumbled into a philosophy class. I was originally a psychology major, so I wanted to understand, how people function, um, and to help people who had similar stories to me. And over the years doing GEs, I picked philosophy classes, not really knowing what they were. It just happened to be I was taking ethics, prejudice, discrimination, and morality. I took war and terrorism. I took Aztec philosophy. By the time I had done just 1 year in college, my professor asked me, Dr. Andrew Fitzgibbon, who I had on my show a couple weeks ago, he's like, how many credits have you taken? I was like, oh, I've taken like 18. He goes, yeah, you're a minor. Why don't you just pick it up? So I did. And then I just kind of fell in love with it more than I had the storytelling and the science behind psychology. I found philosophy to be better at answering the questions that I had, and so I threw myself into it. And I'm now finishing my undergraduate degree. I've taken double the amount of credits required for my degree in philosophy specifically, and then I also have a minor in religious studies where I've done the same thing. I've taken double the amount that I needed. And so I kind of what I really do now is that I take these philosophical questions and I apply them into a very specific field, which is atheism. It's typically known as the philosophy of religion, though it sounds kind of antithetical to the idea. But they wrestle with the same topics, no matter what. You just take different approaches to them. And I decided to make content about it because I saw that the people, as I'm sure you guys have seen as well, the content creators that I saw weren't really doing philosophy. It was more pop philosophy. where you can kind of find it in almost any type of like self-help book that weren't really like grappling with the foundation, the first principles of these problems. And so I decided to kind of just take that on myself, and it just blew up a lot more than I had expected, especially in such a short time.
I want to go back. You said your grandmother introduced you to some of these questions. At what age were you?
I mean, so I would have the questions first, right? Because I was like, I mean, she was a regression therapist, so
Yeah.
I grew up around, spirituality, deep spirituality,
Yeah.
heavily influenced by Buddhism, heavily influenced by your typical spiritualist thoughts. And so any questions that I had, my grandma was there to answer them.
How old do you
Um,
think those started, though? Like, what age were you when you're delving into things that sometimes people aren't even thinking about either their entire life or not until their 30s or 40s?
yeah, I couldn't have been more than 13
So,
when I was wrestling with them.
yeah. So if I go back to our conversation, Britt and I, after our last interview, we stayed after to have a conversation about that interview and about some other things. And one of the things we went into was when you introduce big ideas to young kids, whether that's positive or negative. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are, because I think there is some danger and some benefit, so risk reward, of introducing younger youth, maybe even younger children, to really big ideas and sort of getting them to think outside the box for the first time. Your thoughts on the impact on you? I mean, it sounds like it's been a great thing in the long run for you,
Yeah.
but maybe caused some challenges early on.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, definitely my grandmother was not, in my face telling me, life doesn't have any meaning. Thankfully, she was not. In fact, it was quite the opposite. She would work with people in passing. So she would walk people through the other side, whatever that means. But it meant a lot to her, and it meant a lot to me as a young kid. And so the questions I had were, is there life after death? Is there God? Why is there so much evil in the world? And she never evaded my questions. There wasn't a single time where she was like, listen, I don't want to talk with you about that. And she answered all of them. And so to a certain extent, it was incredible. She did not limit my exploration in the slightest. She just let me go. Wherever I wanted to go, she was there, recommended me books from Dr. Brian Weiss, Raymond Moody. And then as I got older, we got over to Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. Carl Jung, very specifically for her, she's a Jungian individual. But so to a certain extent, it's great to let a kid's mind explore. It can certainly have detrimental effects. But I don't think that a kid should be really questioning, or at least should be provided an answer that life has no meaning. You can even frame it in a way that you can evade the question while also answering it, which I think is what she did, really. Which is, does God exist? Well, Austin, we are gods. God is within us, and we are within God, and that's typically the answer that I got. And what she meant by God, couldn't tell you. I have no idea. Actually, something I would like to talk with her about that. Now that this is kind of like where I explore it. So that is what I explore. By the way, I do. What is God? What is atheism? The atheism, that's typically my realm. And all of that work that I did, all the questions I had when I was a kid, led me to exactly where I am. And in that, it's been great for me. I can definitely say, though, that I would say that it probably had a negative effect in the way that I communicated with other kids. No one else is really interested in spirituality in the way that I was. No one else was interested in the books that I wanted to read and talk about. So I was like that nerdy kid to a certain extent. But that generally came out afterwards, after like my rebel age, if that's what you want to call it, because I went downhill really hard and I hit rock bottom pretty hard. Which then once I came out of it, I was like, oh right, spirituality, and I got right back into that.
So I think I assumed, because of your name, reason, and religion, and because you were doing atheism content, I kind of just assumed that you were one of those many people who went to theology school, was a part of an organized religion, turned to atheism at some point when things didn't, add up. but you were really never a part of like an institutional like form of Christianity or something like that. You just would say like you had deep existential questions as a kid and spirituality around you, and you just found that place really interesting. Or yeah, like what was it about religion that like why reason and religion? Because I just kind
Mhm,
of assumed that you had like a Christian background and went to theology school or something.
mhm. Yeah, I definitely didn't go to theology school, not yet at least. My applications are in, so I'm
Okay.
waiting to hear back. Um, so yeah, I grew up spiritualist and like that type of realm. My father is a Roman Catholic and DiValentino, a heavy Italian family. And so everyone around me was a Roman Catholic on my dad's side of the family, and my mom's side very spiritualist. Um, when I turned 22, I got really interested in Christianity. Not even in a spiritual sense at the beginning, but just like historically and philosophically.
Mhm.
I started to read like people like C.S. Lewis. I got into Dale Allison's work um, for the historicity of the resurrection and stuff like that. And then I did kind of lean into, not kind of, I leaned into Christianity pretty hard. And I believed it to a certain extent. And then an event happened, which I'm sure we can talk about,
Yeah,
that
please.
yeah, so May 20th, 2024, my stepdad was killed pretty brutally, and so unjustly, I can't really go into like legal reasons, like the details of it and what happened, but just know there was a lot of questions about justice, evil, suffering, teleology and stuff like that, and so I believed it, and then I started to ask questions, and I blindly threw myself in. I started to have panic attacks where consistently all day long, um, where my blood pressure would reach like 170 over 110. I went to the hospital 5 times for it. It was death anxiety. I couldn't handle the
Mm.
idea that he was here and he wasn't, and that can happen to me too. It can happen to anyone around me. It did happen to someone around me, and so I threw myself into Christianity even further. And I knew that it was due to the fact that I didn't want to be so uncomfortable anymore, and that if I got closer to Jesus, um, I the anxiety would go away. Because if I die, at least I'm going to heaven, right? And then I intentionally became an atheist. I wanted to see what my foundations were built off of. Once I like really calmed down, I wasn't having so much trouble. I wanted to know, do I believe this? And so I did a Cartesian raise, and I, went back to a first principle, not in just an epistemological sense, but just in a specific realm. Why do I believe the Christian doctrine? And I couldn't build myself back up. And so I became edgy atheist. And now I'm at the point where, because I only tried to build back up in Christianity, and
Mm.
I think that was a limited response. I should have just, okay, I shouldn't be an atheist because Christianity is not true. What about all these other things? And that's where I am now. Kind of playing around with what it means to be an atheist. What do you mean by God? That really annoying Petersonian question, what do you mean by God? And it is a fairly good question. That's kind of where I do most of my work now.
Mm.
You you say throwing yourself into Christianity really hard, and then you choose to be an atheist to sort of see what sticks around if you give that a try. And I'm just curious if you can, Christianity, at least on some level, requires certain beliefs. The Christ is the Savior, he rose on the third day. Is there a particular belief that you held on to really strongly when you were in it? And then as you
Mm,
gave atheism a try, you found yourself thinking about that belief differently and then discarding it. I'm just curious because I've done this too. Britt's done this. I'm curious, like if you could name a belief and what changed about it as you tried the outsider lens.
yeah, certainly. The primary proposition for Christianity is going to be the resurrection. There's no question. And so when I started back up, you can't just jump, at least in a philosophical sense, you can't just jump to, did the resurrection happen? You have to start even lower. Who wrote these gospels? And so that's kind of where I started. And I couldn't get get past the fact that they were not written by eyewitnesses. Now, just to make it very clear, the fact that they were not written by eyewitnesses does not mean that they're not reliable. That's just a doctrine or an idea that just should not be held, even from an atheistic standpoint. It certainly could be the point that, or at least at minimum, we have Paul writing in the 50s, calling Jesus God. We have Mark in the 70s, Matthew and Luke 85. Though I've heard that Luke, there might be some new scholarship that's pushing Luke even further to the 120s. Don't know how true that is. I'll leave it up to Dan McClellan. He can do his thing.
I was just going to say, I'll ask Dan. He'll know.
Yeah. I have no idea how reliable that scholarship is. And then John, you have in the 90s. So at minimum, we have very early on people identifying Jesus as some divine figure. That shouldn't be ignored, because this was a very Jewish culture where they had their one God of Israel, right? And all of a sudden, all these people are, calling Jesus God. It's something very significant happened within this culture that shouldn't be ignored. But I couldn't build back up to the point that I was. I'm still there. I'm still very much, this is interesting. Something happened. I'm very much at the point now, though. Jesus did not raise from the dead. There was no immaculate conception. Jesus was not God, and I'm not convinced that if there is a God, that the Old or New Testament carries that correct God.
And I think that's actually one of the reasons why Mormons or ex-Mormons are more likely to go atheist than other religions, is because we actually, as a young religion and a record-keeping religion, we actually see how eyewitness testimony, turns into myth, turns into legend, turns into scripture, and we get to see that process happen. And so when we're deconstructing from Mormonism, and then we take a look at Christianity, and the eyewitness testimony is worse than it was in Mormonism as far as its reliability, then there's nothing there, which is one of the reasons why Mormons go atheist more than other religions. So it's interesting that you pointed that out. But what I find so interesting about your story, and I think the reason that I just resonate with your content so much, is I sense in your story that these questions about the death of God and what's going to happen to us existentially with the death of God, and existential fears and nihilism that pop up when we don't have these constructs that keep these existential fears at bay, that's not just an abstract concept for you. That happened to you, where you did not have enough grounding in your life to deal with one of our 4 existential fears, which is death. And that showed up psychologically in your life in a very impactful, negative way. And that to me is just really interesting, because it just makes these concepts about is there God or not, and what happens if there is no God, that's not abstract for you, that's also personal.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And and I would just love to hear you just talk more about if you had a very difficult experience today as far as someone dying close to you in some unjust way. Do you feel like you have existentially stabilized and can handle that, or do you still feel like you're kind of unmoored in this kind of, I don't really know if God is there or not? Where are you with that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I am a human. I'm going to respond in a human-like manner if something bad happens, if someone that I care about passes away. I'm going to be very upset by it. There's no question. Whereas before, when my stepdad died, it was I turned up. I looked at God, and why are we asked? Why did you let this happen? Why in this way? Why in such a brutal manner? And then didn't get any justice for it afterwards. And even let the guy get off the hook. I was pissed. I was very mad about it. And now, if something like that were to happen, I can't really give this is exactly how I would respond, because I haven't had that yet. But I can imagine. I mean, I have smaller things that happen, and one of my good friends often says to me that she looks for human responses in me, where because I don't respond to certain things the way that many people do. wrestle constantly. My area is really atheism, so I'm always in this realm of existentialism, nihilism. I don't spend much time out of this, and so I have trained myself to respond in a way that aligns with those concepts. Where, yeah, bad stuff happened. You know, uh, we can expect that.
Hmm.
There's there's not much that I can do to change it, which is very upsetting. But this is also the way that life is.
Yeah. A few years ago, and Bill and I were podcasting through this, and so it was a public journey that I went through. My daughter fell out of a window and had a traumatic brain injury. And I was actually kind of, as I was emotionally dealing with what was happening, we were in the hospital for 6 weeks. I was just kind of noticing like, okay, like how am I doing here without God? Because this was the first bad thing that had happened to me post death of
Yeah,
God. And what I noticed is like what the Buddhists call, like I had a lot of first arrow pains of like this was terrible and I'm going to feel this, and I was
yeah,
having certainly a human response, but I noticed that I wasn't having like what Buddhism calls the secondary pains, which in religion I would have been like, what is God trying to tell me? Do I need to be fasting for this child? Is this a test? Is this a punishment? Just lots of like secondary suffering around the main suffering. And I didn't have that anymore because I didn't believe in God anymore. And I actually think I got through that situation better because like rationally kids fall out of windows, and there was nothing more than just the suffering of sitting in that of kids fall out of windows sometimes. And
yeah.
but yeah, it's interesting to kind of gauge how suffering changes based on like your kind of conceptual
Mhm.
container around it.
Yeah, first of all, I am, very sorry to hear about that.
She's doing great, but yeah, she's
Awesome,
she's doing fantastic. So
awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very normal response. To First of all, when you are religious and or spiritualist in some manner, to explain it, to try to explain it. It's better to be able to explain it. And the answer that I would give now, it sounds like what you would give as well, is these things happen, and that's kind
yeah.
of where I am now.
Okay. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in our questions just because I have a sense we're going to spend a lot of time here because this is something that Bill and I talk about, I don't know, almost weekly for years, it feels like, which is this question of, is it worth it to know what's true? So I'm going to frame this as like something that you've talked about is the cost of studying philosophy when it comes to your mental health. And for you, it's been worth it paying that price. But let's just say for a second, if we could know that, like, none of us claim to know that there is for sure no God, but let's say we could know that there is no God. The universe doesn't care that we're here. There's no free will. We're an accident. We're violent by nature. This is a violent planet. No one's coming to save us. If we could know for sure that all that was true, there's this ethical question of like, should we tell people? Does the mental health go down so much that even if that were true, we shouldn't tell people and we should just allow them to cling to their stories because well-being matters more than truth.
Mhm.
Anyway, Bill and I have just like exhausted this. So I'm excited to have another voice and just opinion on what you think about this question of, is the truth worth knowing, and how do you wrestle with that?
Yeah, I think that truth is worth knowing if you find it valuable, right? And um, for some people, for specifically philosophers, they make their life about finding truth, no matter the consequences. Scientists do this as well. Um, I don't think that truth has value in itself. I think that truth is instrumentally valuable. And so I typically do this thought experiment of the dying grandmother, right? Of you're in a room with your siblings, your grandmother is about to pass away, and your brother says to her, "Grandma, you're about to die." Um, we'd probably be pretty mad that they said that. It is true that they said that, and imagine there's like, yeah, you're about to die, and there's no God, and you're just going to be nothing forever. I don't find any value in that. In fact, I would probably say you're not a good person. But there's something very interesting there too. I think most people would agree with that. Even those who typically
Mhm.
the new atheist movement would probably say the same thing.
Mhm.
So what's going on there? It's very clearly that they also think that truth isn't actually valuable in itself.
Mm.
Um, that it is instrumentally valuable. So what is it instrumentally valuable for? Well, what they're trying to do, if we condemn the action of telling grandma that she's dying, um, which she clearly already knows and doesn't really want to be um, told again, I'm sure. Um, what they're trying to do then is make someone feel comfortable. Now that's interesting. If we're all looking to help each other, um, and sometimes we can just avoid the truth. That's not a bad thing. One of the things, like this whole idea of the intrinsic value of truth, we find it in Plato a lot. He really places truth as this super valuable thing, and Nietzsche comes along, right? And he's um, well, why? None of you have really argued for this. You kind of just put it up there and said it's king, but without even making an argument for it. And that's one of the things I find so valuable about Nietzsche that no one talks about. We always hear about the revaluation of values. We always hear about the death of God. No one seems to talk about his revaluation of truth, which, in a way, though, of course, he wants to do like the life affirming stuff. I would take a different stance. I'd say, yeah, truth maybe isn't valuable in itself, and we can just make people feel comfortable. That's typically where I would go in that realm, and that where people who do seek truth for truth, we have seen very detrimental effects to humanity. We look towards the politicians and the scientists, and we typically, this also goes back to Plato. I won't really explain all that, but we look to the scientists and the philosophers back then, the philosophers. So the scientists and the politicians to give us answers, right? And they go off in their little groups and they discuss it, and we kind of stay out of it. And they're pursuing truth until they do something horrible and it affects all of us. And now we're all affected while they're pursuing truth. And now we're looking to them again and go, okay, well, help us now. We're looking to the same people who threw us in the water and going, well, help us to stop us from drowning, even though they're the ones that caused it. And this has been radically increased because of a capitalistic society. It is a society that values profit over people. It takes people and alienates them from their work and makes them feel as though their value comes from money, and that money is in fact more valuable than the people. And so we're pursuing and funding truth finding at the detriment of human flourishing. And that is one of the biggest problems that we find in our society today. That all comes back to the valuation of truth and politics.
So first, I want to say thank you, because I think something you added to the conversation, again, that Britt and I have had numerous times about which one's more important, which direction to come in from. You suggested it's really up to the individual, because every person is different from every other person. And it seems like we should make it so that rather than saying truth is important or the illusion is important because of the benefits that that illusion gives, it really should be up to the person whether they're a truth at all cost kind of person or whether they really need the safety and security that an illusion gives. And in the religion that I came from, there are people out there who think it is worth proving out loud that that religious system wasn't true at the expense of hurting people because they're not ready yet for it. So you pull the table legs out and they don't have a place to sort of figure it out.
Yeah.
And I've had people who have left who have come back to me and said, man, I wish I could believe again. I wish I could go back. This has been so difficult, so hard. And I think for most people that I talk to, they're happy to be out, to have deconstructed it, to step away. But for some, it was detrimental to their well-being. And so I'm just curious, in the loss of certainty that religion gives, and I think religion, I know I'm stammering here, but I do have a place I want to go. Often we create spiritual practices as a form of bypassing, and I asked this to Rainn Wilson too. Religion gives us a way to sort of skip over sitting with the discomfort and have the answer, and to feel good, like, oh, I know I'll be with my family again. Isn't that nice? I'm just curious, as you let go of certainty and have deconstructed religious spiritual ideas in your world, do you miss it? Or are you happy that you've got, because you could both be like, look, I wouldn't go back. This is a sense of awareness that I appreciate, but I also am sad that I lost certainty. I'm just curious what your relationship is with the loss of certainty that you've had to go through.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
At times, certainly, at heart, I'm a philosopher, right? So I am one of those people who is interested in truth. I'm also a caring human being. I'm interested in people, and so I can find out like what's true, and it's great. But I would only ever pursue what's true if it also helps people, or more so, I would never pursue a truth that harms people, even if I believe that I have it. And so at heart, that is the type of person that I am. Now, given, I would absolutely never attempt to kick people's feet out from under them. For example, when I first became an atheist and I thought that I had, knowledge that everyone needed to have, I was in a seminar called Alternative Concepts of God. And this Christian girl wanted to debate with me about atheism. She was Christian. And I just went at her, and just everything that I knew, just gunned her. And afterwards, she told me, she's like, my sister died of cancer 2 years ago, and I hold on to this because it's really helpful. And I was like, oh, I am a horrible person. And so I recognized that early on into like my atheism thing, and so I recognize that certainty for other people is valuable. And now for myself, like I said, I do value the path of philosophy that leads to truth. And just as a normal person, yeah, I miss certainty sometimes. I would walk around feeling loved constantly. Jesus is always with you. And where I was at the location that I was, the college that I was at when I was a Christian, it was a very Christian college. And so everyone was a Christian. There was a sense of community where we would all talk about the Gospels. Now I'm a reader, so I would always be the one who many of the people actually haven't read the Gospel. So I'd be the one teaching what's actually in it to my friends and stuff. And so there was community, there was constant love. There was the idea of life after death. That's all great. And so as a person, of course, I wish that I had that. And I would never try to take that away from someone else. Again, I should say. Yeah.
So I'm curious for you, what I feel like this is the conversation I have with so many atheists now, where there's this recognition that new atheism was super fun. And then we all kind of have that moment where we're like, oh, I'm the asshole. For me, it was in my angry atheist phase. I had a friend who was deconstructing really quickly and had a suicide attempt. And I was like, oh shit, there are ethical concerns to what I'm doing here. And I guess my question is, what keeps you from going full Jordan Peterson, where we're just going to it's not capital T true, but we're going to act as if it is true. And we're going to act, belief is this kind of action that we're going to be a part of. And so that we don't fall into nihilism. Are you ever kind of tempted to go that direction where capital T truth is no longer really a value at all, because these practical truths are much more, valuable? Where do you go with that complexity?
at heart, Jordan Peterson is a Nietzschean, right? So he
Yeah.
is very influenced by this.
He really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at heart, almost in everything.
Yeah.
He's a Nietzschean, and so it's just like easy to predict with him. But what I did not predict was his almost like pragmatic value of God, which Nietzsche would not have done.
Right.
Right. Now with Peterson, people don't like his conception of God. I'm actually quite a fan of his conception of God as the highest value in your hierarchy of values of which directs your life. I think that's a good definition of God. If you kind of pull back and you look at what God is, I wrote a short Substack article last night called "What is God?" And my answer to that is God is that which one calls God. And what does one typically call God? Well, people typically call God that which they value most and utilize as a symbolic figure which directs their life. And Peterson takes a very similar route. And then you have people like Alex O'Connor, who's trying to like pin him down and say, well, if there was
there's a camera, if there's a
Yeah.
camera at Jesus' resurrection, what do we see?
Yeah. What's so interesting there is that he said that he would suspect that Jesus walked out of the tomb, and no one expected him to say that.
I actually didn't expect him to say that.
Yeah, but then if you watch other interviews, he's talking with Diary of a CEO, and and he says, "Well, is Jesus God?" And he goes, "Well, if you know what God means, it's undeniable. You know, it's well, sure. What does God mean? Because what you mean by God is not what the typical Christian means by God. Like, do you genuinely think that God or that Jesus is the creator of the universe?" Most people at that time would have said Peterson doesn't think that, and then he said yes to Alex. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that I think that Jesus is God or that I think that Jesus walked out of the tomb. No. But I do think that God is that which one calls God. And I have no problem saying that Jesus is God for you. There's no question. No, Jesus is not God for me. And I don't utilize the term God to describe my world or myself. And so I think that is what the idea of an atheist kind of is. So I wouldn't go as far as Peterson goes with the God stuff. I don't know where Peterson's kind of aiming there. It's interesting to say the least. It's very interesting. But I wouldn't take the route that he goes, but I would take the route of like the pragmatist philosophers of saying, well, truth could just be what's useful, and that's something interesting.
That's the place that, like, we're both gonna have lots to say here, but that's the place that becomes interesting for me as an ex-Mormon, is because I left because I feel like it wasn't true. And then if you get to this atheist, complex philosophical place where it's like, well, is the best way to look at truth is whether or not it's useful, and Mormonism in many ways can be useful to someone's life, then why then like, oh, but I left. And now I'm in this more complex place. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to my tradition too. Again, coming out of Mormonism as well. There are all these games that get played. So there are a set of apologists. We call them neo-apologists. And they're much more compassionate. They acknowledge the problems. But and then they have all of these Rube Goldberg machines in order to get from point A to point B and make it true again. And so there's all these mental gymnastics. You have to, if you make all these allowances, you allow all this conjecture. And then I've had private conversations with these people. I've interviewed them. And then after the 2-hour interview, we stay behind for another 25 minutes with me asking a few additional questions that I notify them aren't going to be part of the recording. And at the time I was a believer, and they would go so much further in their private conversation than they would to the people. It's a game being played, right? Like they're loyal to the institution, and they see their job as helping people maintain faith, but they're withholding some of their truth, and they're presenting to the people that they talk to as if that's their truth. And when you understand what they think and believe behind the scenes, you recognize they actually don't believe to the degree that they want others to know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very skeptical of a guy like Jordan Peterson, because I think he's playing some of those games. And I don't know that. I don't know what is, what's in his heart and his mind. But there are ways in which you can tackle the idea, is Jesus God? And I can go, well, let's see, if I'm going to call God the creative energy of the universe and everything outflowed from that, which occurred 13.8 billion years ago, then Jesus came forth from that creative energy, hence he's God. So now I can tell the people in front of me that he is God with a straight face. But if only they knew what I actually meant, they would go, that's not what we're asking you at all. And I just wonder what your thoughts are, if you think, though, again, we can't know, but do you think those kinds of games are being played? Because at Mormonism's level, it will punish you and excommunicate you and silence you if you're not one of its team members. And so if they're too honest, they will no longer have a voice, and maybe all of their street cred comes from being a faithful Mormon. So there's a lot at stake for them to talk right in the church's sense. Jordan doesn't have that on him, although it would dynamically change his following, and that might be a risk. But your thoughts on if he or others are playing this game?
Yeah, Peterson's going to be hard to pin down because like I said, he did say Jesus is God to Diary CEO, but then he followed up with, well, if you know what it means to be God, but then he said to Alex, I suspect yes, when asked if he would walk out of the tomb. If you know what you mean by God, or if you know what I mean by God, that answer fits that agenda much stronger. I think that we can play language games with and try to really figure out what he's trying to say. And in that interview, what I interpreted was Jesus represents the strongest values of the Western civilization that directs and orients an individual's life. Like, makes sense. That's God to most people. And if you believe that's what God is, then Jesus is certainly God. But only if he fits that definition. And most Christians would reject that definition. So I think there's much more room to say he's playing a game there.
It was interesting with Zena, who's on TikTok, and she was one of the people in the 20 Atheist versus Jordan Peterson. And she asked this question of like, why do you think you're right? Like, just because this truth is useful, and then like Peterson does this thing that like, if the truth is useful, then it actually must be true. Like, even historically, these things must be true. And she asked him, like, how do you know that? And he said, because it has a positive effect on people, and people email me and say like they turn their life around and they're not homeless anymore. And so it's interesting that even how he's gauging what's true is like, was it useful to people?
Yeah.
And I think the situation that puts me in, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, because I think about this all the time as a content creator, is that if we get to a place where we could know that most people don't have truth as their driving core value, and that most people wouldn't thrive in like hardcore nihilism, like strip everything away, if most people couldn't psychologically survive that, and it would just force us into authoritarian responses, political religions, slow suicide, addiction, suicide. If we could know that, then is there actually an ethical responsibility on nihilists and atheists and deconstruction people to only critique religion in the places that it's causing harm and not touch it? Like more than that. Because if most people can't survive psychologically nihilism, then should I only be like meeting people there and helping them, or critiquing religion where it's wrong? But I shouldn't be convincing people that that their beliefs are illusions. What do you think about that ethical place?
That's a great question. There's a lot there. So I think that we should absolutely be, if it is the case that most people cannot survive this, then there is some at least motivation to not kick people's feet out from under them. cause them harm, to lead to, you know, suicide, addiction, and a bunch of other detrimental aspects of, I guess, the human condition. There is some type of motivation. I don't know if it's obligation, because I don't really believe in like these uh, obligation set of morality, but there's some strong motivation, certainly. Uh, but I think that it should be done very strategically, where if, you know, if your microwave isn't working, you don't, you know, burn the house down. You just unplug the microwave. You know what I mean? If there's a problem with specific parts of a religion, let's just pick at that part. You know, you don't have to burn the whole tradition to the ground. At its foundation, religions are they're just traditions. Some of them which don't really have to do with God. One of the things I love about Kevin Carnahan on
Mm.
TikTok and Instagram is that every time he talks about religion, he goes, "Yeah, religion, whatever that is, that's a good answer." Because we don't really know what religion is. Does it always have to do with God? Google will tell you yes, that it's the worship of gods. But you know, Einstein was a very religious individual who believed in this Spinoza's concept of God, which many people. I mean, he was driven out of his city because he was an atheist. He wasn't a theist. Um, so I don't think that we should just be burning religions to the ground. I find religion to be very useful for many people. Many people find religions to be useful for them. And there's comfort there, community, but certainly there's negative aspects of religion as well. No question. I would say specifically what we're seeing today with, you know, evangelical American fundamentalism certainly has detrimental effects. No question.
Yeah.
And so there's parts of that we can point at. We can, you know, we can really dig at it. But kicking the whole religion to the ground, I personally am against.
Yeah. One of the things I appreciate about, and I'm not sure if this will end up being a comment or a question, but it's to play with the ideas that you guys are both pointing at. So one of the things I really appreciate about Jordan Peterson is the ambiguity. That I remember hearing a quote from him, and it's to the extent that you started off with, Britt, which is something along the lines of, he's asked if there's a God, and he said, "I act as if there is a God."
Mhm.
And that to me was, and then he doesn't really want to expound all the way, right? He stops short of a line. He knows there's a line where it's not his job to define the terms for the next person. And I really like that, because Mormonism had all the answers. And even as an atheist, which I call myself, there's mystery in the universe. And we were talking last week that Neil deGrasse Tyson says, you know, maybe we know 3 or 4% of what we even know to ask. And of course, we don't know, as Britt said last week, that we don't even know the things that we don't know to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the believer side, I think it would be so nice if there was a lot more ambiguity. I went to a Presbyterian church a couple weeks ago, and they were like, believe whatever you want. Whatever you believe is good enough for us. All are welcome. And most religions aren't that way, right? Like, you know, God hates homosexuals. God, you know, hates left-handed people. God, you know, God has all these things he doesn't like. And how the hell could we know? So the ambiguity I appreciate, and what I think you're hitting at is maybe on the side of non-belief, we ought to be more ambiguous because we don't know either. I always tell people, they'll say, what do you think? What do you think it is? And I'll say, I don't know what it is. I know what it's not. I know it's not Mormonism. I know it's not the Jehovah's Witnesses. I know it's not Scientology, but I don't know what it is. And I wonder if either one of you want to comment on this, if it would be better for us on the atheist leaning side to be more ambiguous, to leave room for people to discover mystery and to call it what they want. And like you said, Austin, to push back against specific ideas where someone crosses the line of rational thought, or they're saying something that's absurd, or more importantly, if it'll hurt people, which you pointed to earlier as well. Like we don't want to do harm, but that maybe we ought to leave the big overarching concepts, at least in most places, sort of out of the conversation.
Yeah, there's a word you use there that I want to really point at, and it's mystery. There's a tradition in Christianity called the Via Negativa, known as negative theology. and it's basically God can't be spoken of. And so you can say what God's not, and God, you would say, God's not found in Mormonism. God's not this figure in the sky with the big beard. God is, that's it, right? You can't say anything. And there's something that's super interesting there, where it acknowledges the epistemic limitations of of divinity, but we can say what God's not. And I had a conversation with Dr. Andrew Fitzgibbon, who's a reverend and a doctor of philosophy, and he said that God is mystery, but that we can kind of maybe find hints of God. And so what he said was, when Jesus said God is love, maybe there's a hint there. And as it brings all of us together, but we're still not saying what really God is. But more so, perhaps God can be found in these loving places. And that's kind of where I think I agree with you, that ambiguity may lead to a sense of community, a non exclusive community, which I think is the um, path to, I would say, some form of peace.
Hmm. I like some of that, and then there gets to this moment where when I talked to the people who believe that God is mystery and God is source and these kinds of words, is like I can go so far, especially as someone who works a lot in spirituality and leaves a lot of room for spiritual experience and transcendence and mysticism and mystery. I can I walk there, and then something inevitably happens where and I think Pete Holmes is the one that I see this the most, who's a comedian who talks about God, but they then start to talk about God in this way that tries to get around the problem of evil. And when Pete Holmes talks about God, he's like, God is just the movie screen, and the movie screen doesn't know what the movie is being played, right? And it just completely takes God outside of any kind of problem of evil question. And I think sometimes this is like the new God of the gaps, or the new way to deal with the problem of evil, is by making God so mysterious and so other that you're just trying to bypass problem of evil questions. Because my thing is, like, if God is source, or God is the movie screen, but the movie is the Holocaust just continuously, then can
Yeah.
you say that God is good? Because maybe
Yeah.
source is just the source of all suffering and evil,
Mhm.
and they never seem to go that direction. And so I think there's like a lot of like they sneak in a lot of optimism and good and love without addressing the suffering. And I feel like that's happening a lot in that camp. Do you see that?
Mm. Yeah, almost certainly. I would definitely agree. I think that there are negative theologians who take a positive route, and then also there are ones that will just evade the question. I think I know who you're talking about with the comedian. I could be wrong, but I think I've seen some of his work. Um, yeah, I think that it is almost a deliberate way. I do think, in the philosophical sense, that it doesn't evade the question, but it also doesn't answer it, which I think
Mm,
that we do try to get the answers out of it. Um, I appreciate negative theology, but I also agree. I do understand and see its
mm,
limitations, almost
mm,
certainly. The problem of evil is tricky because in analytic philosophy, it's kind of been left behind,
mm,
because people have like tried to prove that it doesn't, or that it disproves the existence of God, but at the same time, there's so many different theodicies that provide answers, and so it got to the point. It's so ambiguous that it's just so hard to answer. Now there are bad answers, certainly, such as uh, soul making, right? Because then it doesn't explain animal suffering. It doesn't explain animal
mm,
suffering in the slightest. And I would say for the problem of evil, that it is impossible to answer. Now, I personally think it does make it improbable that a loving and intentional God exists. That
mm.
doesn't mean that God doesn't exist, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's
just it's
funny.
so specific.
Yeah, that's where I end up too, is like when people talk about deism or creative forces, I'm like, yeah, maybe, like for sure that's possible. And then they smuggle in and God is good. And I'm like, oh, whoa, oh,
Uh,
hold on. You made a move
yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I just, in my life, I've been burned too many times by people who claim to know a thing that, as far as I'm concerned, is unknowable.
Mhm.
And every unhealthy religion makes dramatic claims about what God is or how he works or what his theology is, what the right way is to get back. And I'm to the point in my life where anyone who claims to know a thing that my brain says that's unknowable, I've already dismissed them. That they aren't. The moment you get to, in other words, let me say it this way. Jordan Peterson, what I think he does is he tiptoes around the circle and he knows where the circle line is and he knows not to get too close to the center. And the people who get too close to the center demonstrate to me that they actually don't know the thing. And the people who stay a little further away from the edges are more ambiguous, give all of us room to make our own individual meaning about it, seem to know it better. Hence, what I'm wondering is if God is just a filler word. It's a filler word for things we don't know, but with which we are drawn to try to figure out. We want to know certain questions about our life and the meaning of it, and we feel drawn to try to figure that out on all sides. And God seems like a nice little 3-letter word that allows us to just play in that sandbox without having to name anything, just to be curious about it. And again, I don't know if that's something you guys want to comment on, but it does strike me that way.
It goes to something that, because I wrestle with how to use the God word ethically in my work since I talk about spirituality and with clients. And I kind of ended up in a space where, for me, if someone's using that God word as a filler word to just express an emotion, like walking into a cathedral and saying, I feel God here, then even as an atheist, I say, I feel God here too. Why? It's just a word. It's just a mouth sound for something that we're experiencing. But then when someone says, God is this and demands this, like, okay, that's a different thing. Like, that's a statement about the nature of reality, and I'm going to be very much more wary to use the God word. But I guess my question for you, Austin, is I had a TikTok this week about magical thinking, and it was a Reddit post that went viral about little silly things that humans do, even quite secular, atheist, rational people. And it was something like, what do you do that you kind of know is magical thinking, but you do it anyway? And people would be like, when I pull into a parking lot, I ask this specific saint to open up a spot, or I've named my house and it, I take care of it like it's a person. All the silly little ways that we personify or have little superstitions. And so my question for you is, as you are reason and religion, and you talk so much about reason and philosophy and cognitive thinking, how much magical thinking do you think is dangerous? Because I see kind of two camps in atheism where, like, the Sam Harris types will say it's always dangerous because there's always a cost to society. And then more like the Stephen Fry atheist who's like, this is like humans can play in these ritual, magical thinking kind of spaces as long as it doesn't cause too much harm. It's just part of being human. What do you think about that question?
Yeah, I would like to picture it this way. So, like I said, I grew up in a spiritual household. There was sage being burned. There were crystals around the house. Now imagine Sam Harris inside my grandmother's living room as she's, saging the house.
He would just say bullshit, right?
Yeah, yeah. What value does that give? It's certainly not harming anyone. Um, and in a way, it's just making her feel better, even if it has no, mystical, magical properties. It's just making her feel better. And what harm does that cause to society? I would say none. In a way, it can even cause a sense of community, being around, and you're all believing this is a very peaceful thing, and it actually doesn't cause harm. I think that's a very important part as well, that it actually does not cause harm.
Yeah. His argument would be that, like, you think it doesn't harm, but it's gonna show up somewhere. So his example was like, if you believe in souls, and do all these rituals and it doesn't hurt anyone and you have a crystal to help protect the energy around your soul, fine. And then we start doing stem cell research and all of a sudden the soul people are saying we can't touch these eggs that would actually help real people and spina bifida and whatever, because now people believe that souls are involved. And so his argument would be that, like, it will show up somewhere when we need to actually focus on the practicality of solving a problem, and people are too used to going to magical places. Like, what would you say to him there?
I would say that it's certainly true that there are some traditions that would do that. No question. Like, we have evidence of that. Would everyone do that? No. Would
Mm,
most people do that? Particularly with like the sage and the crystal stuff. Like, are those the type of people who would say, "Don't go do stem cell research"? Not in my experience, right?
mm,
Um, so are there people who would try to limit scientific research based on their own, magical, wishful thinking? Sure. Um, is it enough to say that all magical thinking should be dismissed? No.
mm.
I think that's a very limited view, and that in itself would lead to harm. And if his goal is to just, uh, try to decrease harm, well, I think that he's working in the opposite direction. He's working against himself.
What do you think, Bill? Do you have any, like, superstitions? I mean, I know you don't have superstitions around the Browns winning football games because that doesn't work, but
No,
do you have
I,
any, like, magical thinking things that you do?
I don't think I do. And you asked this before. I'll have to, and I've tried to go through my like week and go like, okay, Brits had this question. Am I doing anything that I'll keep paying attention to that.
Yeah.
I do wonder this though, is what you guys are pointing to is that what Sam Harris isn't dealing with is that human beings develop at a certain rate. Frontal cortex doesn't come into being fully developed until we're around the age of 25 or later. And so people need paradigms and perspectives that are at their cognitive level, at their developmental stage. And what he's suggesting is just get rid of all of it and everything will be better. And as you're pointing out, Austin, like, whoa, wait a minute. How would Sam tackle the problem, which is that people aren't educated or given the tools and resources and maybe are limited until they grow up and out of certain kinds of paradigms to be able to even handle the world that way? It seems like he's got no plan in place, which I think you're pointing to. He's got no plan in place to make sure that everybody has a soft, healthy landing from that.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the problems with the new atheist movement as a whole is that it is philosophically bankrupt.
Mm,
It does not offer any type of support. Like Sam Harris's moral landscape, trying to give objective moral values based off science. Any philosopher in the field is going to reject Sam Harris's perspective on this. I think he does great work in free will, incredible work in free will.
mm,
Um, Now, his response to or his way of thinking, I think, limits um, or perceives the human being as a purely rational being, which our majority of our history tells us otherwise. Now, there we are certainly our reason helped us survive. Our ancient sapien ancestors helped them survive to build communities, gather food, hunt, outsmart other sapient species and other predators, build communities that turned into civilizations that then built markets, and this is all great, and it shows that humans are rational. Um, but it seems that Sam ignores the imaginative and the emotional part of the human being, which is just as valid.
mm.
um, if you're going to reject that part of the human being, you're rejecting the human being. You're getting something that's just um, half of what it should be, and half of what it's always been, if not a little bit more. And so my answer to Sam would be that he ignores the human condition in a way that would be more detrimental had we just stuck to philosophical thinking, certainly, rational, but also giving humans the space to be human.
It's also strange. I've heard, there's a quote from Sam about psychedelic substances, for instance, where he says, if my daughters get to the end of their life and they haven't experienced those things, that I would feel sad for them, that they really should have an opportunity to experience that. And I'll just tell you, as one who's done those things, that some of that is in the imaginative. There are again, I didn't believe they were real, but I also didn't exactly believe they weren't. And that the impact that experience had was more transformative by playing in the mystery of what happened in that. So seeing beings under the influence of ayahuasca helped my body mind make more sense of what the medicine was trying to teach me. And since Sam is such an advocate for that kind of experience, it is strange that he doesn't make room to benefit from allowing part of that to be maybe real, maybe not, but maybe best understood if I treat it that way.
Mhm.
Anyway.
What's
I
so
almost-
interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Brett. Go ahead.
It just brings up this question that I think the atheist community has been wrestling with since new atheism kind of didn't pan out in its promises, maybe that we felt like it was promising 10 years ago, that if we could just step away from religion, like the whole world will just be Denmark and everyone will be happy and all this. So do you think it's possible, given human nature, to have something like a secular utopia where we have all sense of transcendence and morality and community and story and narrative and all the good things in a secular context? Or do you feel like that's not actually even possible given human nature?
That's a great question. I do think that it's possible. I don't see it happening anytime soon. Especially, at least, as we look at America, we see what was originally a secular society be, I would say, hijacked by Christian nationalism. And we should keep in mind that is part of human nature, and
Mhm.
the politicians know that very, very well, how to utilize religion for their own agendas. Now, I think that it's possible. Certainly, it's possible. Is it
Yeah.
probable?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
I'm to the point where I think no on both. Like, it's not probable, but I actually am to the point now where I actually don't even think it's possible given
Mm,
what we evolutionarily are. And then I'm in this place where, like, okay, if secular utopia isn't possible, then the answer isn't pushing for this new atheist utopia. It's how do we make secularism better for people who are outside of religion? How do we make religion better for people who are in religion? And that's kind of where I ended up right now. Even though 10 years ago, I was much more just burn it all to the ground,
yeah.
angry atheist. And I'm to the point now where I actually don't even think it's possible. But
Mm.
anyway, we are running out of time. Maybe Bill, you want to ask one more question and then I'll ask one more and we'll wrap it up here. Did you, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
let
there
me,
you are.
yeah, just, I feel like we covered a bunch of this ground. I'll go back to the psychedelic thing. Did you had, I thought you had a thought on that.
Yeah.
What was you thinking when that happened?
So what's interesting about the psychedelic experience is that the science demonstrates that under psychological uh, or under psychedelics, the the neural pathways tend to open up in a way that allows consciousness to explore things things that are outside our ordinary experience. And what I think is interesting about Sam is that he's very the science, right? So what does that science tell us then? What it tells us is that the brain that we typically correlate with consciousness actually inhibited consciousness. So if these psychedelics are actually opening up these neural pathways, allowing for a heightened consciousness, what is that? How does that work? What does that mean for consciousness? And is that some type of magical thing like the thing with Daniel Dennett, for example, who tried to get rid of consciousness? Well, why do they get rid of it? Well, because it's transcendent. You can't explain it. And the thing that David Bentley Hart makes so clear in his experience of God is this circular reasoning around naturalism. It's going to use the naturalist materialism empirical method to explain material and the natural world. Yeah, no shit, you're not going to be able to experience transcendence. It's not built to do so. And so that's why Daniel Dennett is kind of like, yeah, well, consciousness, it doesn't exist. No, well, yeah, it doesn't fit your method. And so I would say the same thing to Sam. It's how are you going to explain the fact that the brain inhibits consciousness, but then when you take the psychedelics, it opens up these neural pathways to allow us to experience the world in a different way? What is that? And I would love to hear his response to it. And I'm sure, I mean, he's a neuroscientist, so I mean, I'm sure that he would have a good answer. But I would love to hear his answer to it.
I wonder. I've said this before. My only hesitation is I don't want to constantly bring up the same points, but there's they've done scientific research where if you're facing a different direction and there's a person behind you, and when they look at you, for you to sense whether they're looking at you or not. And the science shows that it's statistically significant to some degree that you do pick up on the fact that when someone's looking at you, when your eyes are not on them. There are things that can't be explained, and there are things that we don't have figured out yet. And the rational mind and our rational understanding of the world don't quite accomplish it quite yet. Hence, what is it? I don't know. But it's not so simple as Sam Harris would want you to think it is.
This is where what's the philosopher YouTube guy? Is it Joe Foley?
Yeah.
What's this? Yeah. How do you say it?
I think it's Foley. I could be butchering it, but
yeah,
I think it's Foley.
That guy, he makes some really good philosophy content on YouTube, and he says the thing that keeps him up at night is that rationality and atheism, all these things, it ends up eating its own tail, like you're talking about here, which is that if we are evolutionary creatures and rationality is just a byproduct of evolutionary processes, then how can you trust rationality? It becomes something that degrades itself. So what do you do with that question? I'm going to end here and then we'll wrap up. But what do you do with this question of how can we even trust rationality when you look at that, it's like it becomes this thought loop that eats itself because we can't even really then trust our rationality, but that's the foundation that atheism is trying to build on.
Well, I think that we use our empirical experience and we have developed effective methods to produce effective results, right? Like we know how to build cars because they fly. We know how to build airplanes and they fly. And so the new atheism movement wants to tell you that this explains that we should always trust and that our methods are effective in all ways. That's where I disagree. I do think that we have developed methods to based off of our rationality that has led to the development of our civilizations, no question, and that they're effective. Are they effective on all fronts? No. No. When I emailed you the other day and I said to you, like, yeah, I call myself an atheist, but recently I've kind of been
address that.
Yeah, playing with that word a bit. I'm not a materialist. I can tell you that pretty out front. So it leads to a really good question. If mind is prior to the material, or that the material is itself mind, as it has mind states, which I'm more influenced by, I think, the idealism. I think it's very
So you
interesting.
think like consciousness goes all the way down?
It's interesting. It's very interesting. I don't want to say yes.
Don't give me a Jordan Peterson answer. Answer the question.
I think that it is. I definitely will answer the best that I can. My honest answer is, it is too interesting to out front say it does not exist. That's where I will go different from Daniel Dennett.
Hmm.
It is. It leads to the possibility that there's something. Now, I would still identify with like this agnostic atheist front, but if you're going to wrestle with God, um, you should wrestle with the strongest aspects. That's where
Hmm.
I kind of failed, where I first came out of
Hmm.
Christianity. I was like, oh, I was Christian. I'm an atheist now because I couldn't build
Mhm.
back Christianity, where I
Mhm.
should have just stepped back and go, okay, let's look at everything. I
Right.
think that the best and the most difficult problem is this uh, mind stuff.
Mm.
What is consciousness? Where does it come from? How does it work with the body?
Yeah.
How is it that we take these psychedelics and all of a sudden our consciousness enhances and these neural pathways open, and we see the world completely differently? How much out in the world that we don't see? We already know that light in itself appears in our eyes different than how it exists in the world. How much more of there is that we don't have
Mm.
the methods to develop to be able to explore that stuff? Um, and so on that front, I would say that I will refuse or will forego the utilization of the term atheist until I can figure that one out.
Mm.
Hmm. But you're an atheist, like, if you wanna define theism in this very strict kind of classical theology way,
Mhm.
that you can, like, like, I don't think Old Testament God is where it's at, but when people start talking, like, panpsychism, you're just kinda like, "Hmm, okay." You're more
Yeah,
open to
totally.
those spaces.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you
no,
say
I
to
get
me
that.
yeah, if you say to me, Jesus is God, I'm gonna say, well, I mean, if we're talking about, like, if you say, "Do you believe in God?" I have to ask you, "What do you mean?" And then we can have a
Mhm,
real conversation, and if it's
mhm,
this typical religions, no.
mhm.
Um, but we start getting into consciousness, and that's where I'm gonna open up, and I can just say,
Yeah,
"Maybe."
yeah.
I do believe in consciousness, that I do, but what is it that I'm believing in?
Do you think that consciousness is the only thing we can know, in the sense that no matter what else is true about the universe, the fact that there's an experiential quality to existence is maybe the only thing that we can know?
I think, therefore I am.
I
Yeah,
was about to
maybe a
say it's
little of that.
very
Yeah,
Cartesian.
yeah.
Now Descartes, he opened up this incredible conversation and then failed to answer it, gave a horrible answer, and that's the modern period. I actually just made a video on this,
Hmm,
books to read for the modern philosophy, and basically Descartes lays out this problem of skepticism, and he goes, "Okay, I solved it because I proved God. God wouldn't deceive us, and therefore we can trust our senses." And Hume comes along, 23 years old, my age. He comes along and he's like, "Well, you're on the right track, but you did a horrible job with answering the problem." And the whole modern period is trying to solve this. How can you know what you know?
hmm,
Um, and so the pragmatist basically accepted this. I was like, yeah, there's nothing that we can really say about truth. Um, so we can utilize truth as what's useful. And so they kind of took a different front. I would agree that we can't really know if by no we mean certainty, right? There's a different
hmm,
in I did my thesis on the epistemic limitations of religious propositions under a fallibilist framework, and fallibilism is the epistemic system that grants knowledge without certainty, right? So I can say that I know that the sun is going to come up because it is highly probable, based off my evidence, that it has come up every day, that it will come up tomorrow, right? But do I know for certain? No.
hmm.
We kind of just move the goalpost a little bit in philosophy. made it a little bit easier.
Hmm. So many fun things to talk about. Out of time. My last question for you is just for the audience and people who enjoyed
Sure.
this conversation. What do you hope people take away from your work, and what can we expect more from you
Mm.
in the coming year?
What I would hope people take from my work is not that I'm right. I don't care if you agree with me or not. Be gentle with each other's beliefs and be humble in your own.
Hmm.
If we are talking about God and you are trying to disprove God, you're already outside of the conversation. No serious theologian or philosopher in this realm is going to say proof. No, I can disprove your God. I can prove that my God exists. Um, be humble in your epistemic limitations and gentle with others where it's deserving of being gentle. And
Hmm.
simultaneously, um, also, I would say, like, recognize the complexity of religion, God, and atheism. Most of the professionals don't have it figured out. um, so I would hope that people understand that from my work. And then for the things that I have coming up this year, um, over the next few weeks, I have Dan McClellan coming on the show, James Tartaglia, Nolan Gertz, Tilly Middlehurst. I also have Constantino Esposito. I'm doing like a whole like nihilism
Hmm.
lesson, which I hope that you joined for. Yeah, so I'm going to be sitting down with some pretty cool people to have these, important, useful, and meaningful conversations. That is what you can expect more of.
I love that, and I love this idea that, like, let's all be intellectually humble about what the hell is going on with reality, and it's like this thing that I have in my life where it's like, "I don't know anything, but you don't either." And it's
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
people will ask, like, where my confidence comes from when I speak, and it's like, it's not because I know something, it's because I don't think you do. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
Alright, yeah, go ahead.
When I did my thesis, the whole point was to determine that uh, none of us are justified in knowledge, but we are all justified in belief. That's where I led my thesis to. And so it's like this idea that I don't know, but you don't either. But we are both justified. We have justification for our beliefs. And so if we're both justified in our beliefs, perhaps we should just be gentle with each other's beliefs.
Mm.
That's where I led my thesis to.
I love that. Austin, tell folks where people can find your work. Like where are you putting content out? Where are all the places that people can locate you, and how can they find you there?
Yeah, so my Instagram and my TikTok are the same handle that you have here, Reason and Religion. I will have a website that will be made pretty soon. It's not up yet, but that link will also be on my Instagram. I post on both. Um, you can find most of my work on Instagram, and then my YouTube will be much more active over the next coming weeks under the same username, Reason and Religion.
Thanks so much, Austin. Thanks for your
Yeah,
hour here, and I'll see you with all your content, and I'll see you online.
yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks, Austin.
Bye-bye.
Bill, thoughts?
Yeah, those are the kinds of conversations I could just sit around. I envision me at my happiest place is you, me, and people like him and Rainn Wilson and other folks just sitting in a room late in the evening. Somebody's got to be playing guitar in the background too. But just sitting and having a deep conversation around all these things. I love how he went into, towards the end, the whole idea that time and space isn't fundamental to the universe. Consciousness is. He hit on the same point about like Donald Hoffman, that our eyes are really a VR headset. And so it's interesting when I sometimes think I've gone down the crazy rabbit hole and I'm probably off in the weeds somewhere. And then you talk to other people who are thinking about big ideas and they're listening, maybe not necessarily to the same person, but the same concepts somewhere out there. And I just found that really intriguing and really loved the conversation. How about you?
Yeah, he's a young kid, and we kind of have to give him credit that we're having this conversation in our 40s, and at 23, was that how old he was? 23, 24. I mean, I was like young women's president, you know what I mean? Like I would not have been able to really get a grasp of this conversation that we just had, but I could sense in his content. I didn't really know his story. I kind of thought he came from theology, but I could sense that like he's treating religion and atheism with some complexity and with some nuance. And I really liked that about him, which is why I wanted to bring him on, because those are the people that we like, you know, you and me both. And you said this earlier, like if someone comes in and they're sure about their religion, or they're just being like a douchebag atheist where it's like all religion is just bullshit, all of it is just indoctrination. I can't even, I just don't even, I used to argue with these people. I don't even do that anymore. Like I just can't, unless you start the conversation with, I don't know what the hell is going on, but what do you think about this idea? Like that's the only conversation that I have like emotional energy for anymore. And I like that he can play in that space where it's like, I don't think it's that, you know, he definitely deconstructed from something, but he's still exploring. And that's what we do here. We're exploring the edges.
Yeah. I when he was, we were talking earlier, I don't remember, I think it was maybe me that asked it, but we were talking earlier about this ambiguity, that atheists should take on some ambiguity as well. And he hit it hard, saying like we should almost always take it, not knock systems down, for instance. And I can't quite get on board with that. Like there are things about unhealthy systems that they need whistleblowers, they need people explaining the history, they need people giving out information to help people not feel alone and make sense of things. Maybe I'm just trying to protect, in a sense, my livelihood, but I also think genuinely that calling out bullshit about what religion claims that it possibly can't, and to point out flaws in places that it doesn't want to acknowledge are positive things to be spending one's life doing. And I'm just curious where you sort of stand on that question. The way he framed it, what I'm saying now, how do you make sense of all of that?
Yeah, I think we both come at it from a different perspective from him, because I look back and was very much see myself trapped in Mormonism in a way. And I want to at least have the option of looking at it in a different way and choosing if I want to. You know, you talk about this all the time, more than I do, this sense of like consent. And he doesn't come from a system, because he's in this new age spirituality space growing up, where there was consent, and so he can maybe be a little bit softer in that place, whereas you and I were in places in religion sometimes that violated our consent. And that's why I think we both put stuff out into the world. And for me, it's like I put it out into the world, and if it's not for you and you scroll or you write on my page that it's bullshit, that's fine. I don't want to push you out of wherever you are, and that kind of thing. But to the person who, you know, the person who would want to know more about religion and why it exists and their particular religion so that they consent to make a choice, then at least that information is available. And so I kind of see us more doing that, because we know what it's like to lose consent when it comes to religious systems. Whereas coming from New Age spirituality, I don't think he had that same experience. Would you say that?
Yeah, it makes me wish that all of us could have grown up with a very open regressionist therapist grandmother.
Yeah, the crystal grandma.
I think
And yeah, a lot of that, like Sage and Jungian psychology and all of that, like I couldn't play in that space. I'll admit I couldn't play in that space. I would say the first 5 years after deconstruction. It was too, it felt too unsafe. I had too many triggers. But now I can definitely play in places that I couldn't before. And especially in like pagan female witchy spaces, which is very ritualistic, very symbolic. I couldn't have done that earlier on. But I do think it's healthy in those spaces that you just play to the extent that you want to play in that space. But we in Mormonism don't have that option to just like, oh, participate in this religion kind of how you choose to. There was very much it was stricter than that. So I think that's why it gives us that different response, I would guess.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this maybe last week, but that it comes from a position of privilege. And I don't mean that rudely. Like, we all come to things differently, and being raised in a space where no particular system deeply damaged you has you looking at it differently than in a biased way. But also what's a biased way is being in a religion that deeply harmed you and did things to you that weren't consensual and manipulated you by selectively choosing what parts of its history to share and how to tell its narrative in a carefully crafted way. That affected us on our side too.
Yeah. What do you think about that question that I asked him about whether secular utopia is possible? Like, is it possible 5,000 years from now that there is kind of no fundamentalist religion anymore? Or let's say that we don't blow each other up, which, whatever. And do you think it's actually possible, given human nature, that we could override that superstition and draw to authoritarianism and all of that? Or do you feel like it's always going to be this? It's always going to be some people with truth as a high moral value, deconstructing, but most people are a part of some, ideology. What do you think about that one?
Yeah. So first, you threw out what I think is the most exponentially likely answer, which is that we blow ourselves up,
Right,
or a meteor hits the planet, or whatever it is, the zombie apocalypse happens. If we take out all of those end of days things where we resort back to a hunter-gatherer society, and the most powerful and the most ruthless among us take charge again. Again, this is, what do they call it? It's a civilized society, barely. Yeah, I think we can get there if you eliminate all of the most likely possibilities. But because of that, I don't think we get there. Like, does that make sense? Like, the chances that we all little by little come to kumbaya and go like, oh, like, let's just take the wisest voices among us. Let's not let anyone interject their experience as being the rule. Let's make space that everyone has different values and different perspectives. Let's create ways in which we understand that certain kinds of bad behavior are genetic or epigenetic, but let's deal with that in a compassionate way. Like, I just feel like there's so many problems on the table.
You'd have to that's I think one of the problems with this atheist sense of utopia is that if you think we're evolutionary creatures, but your utopia requires us to override every single evolutionary impulse that we have, how can that how can that even really be possible? And then people say oh, with education, and it's like, okay, but you have to have funding for education, and money comes from dogma because that drives our cult brains. And it's the same problem I think we get with how many million people just say let's go back to matriarchy. Nobody has done it since patriarchy came into existence 10,000 years ago. Nobody's survived it because it produces more power and resources and money and children and communities to raise those children. So how do you possibly combat that unless you entirely override your evolutionary impulses? And then people say, these are the debates I have in my brain. And then people also say, well, AI can help us to override some of these brain things that are no longer serving us. And then it's but is it going to be used for that? No, it's going to just further the gap between the rich and the poor, like all technology has ever done. So I don't know. I don't see it. I don't see it happening.
The AI thing is interesting, right? Because right now, immediately, today, we could turn over to some degree government decisions, policies, directions we go in. We could ask AI to evaluate the full scope, look at the pros and cons, and just make the best decision. But yeah, would politicians ever give up that sort of agency to computerized intelligence, which does so without feelings, and better than any one of us has access to all the information available? No. And I was thinking about like Star Trek. Are you a Trekkie at all? Do you watch Star Trek?
I did watch through it once because I named my child Riker, and then I was like, well, I should probably know it. It's not because I'm a Trekkie. I just really like the name. And so I was like, oh, I got to find out who this like Lieutenant Riker is. So I did watch through it once, but I wouldn't call myself a Trekkie.
So you watch the Next Generation,
Yeah.
Captain Riker. Star Trek kind of tackles this a little bit, right? Like people are so far ahead that they're concerned with scientific exploration. And then you watch and they're just human beings too. And then every place they go, every species is just also dealing with these same conflicts inside our being of good and evil and right and wrong and greed and power and influence. That spaceship barely survived from episode to episode. I don't think we can do it.
I've asked the question before, and this is where I get the Trekkies, where it's like, if you know that like more knowledge to someone would decrease well-being, should you tell them? And the Trekkies always show up and say like, whatever their do no harm initiative is. And it's interesting that we kind of did decide this as a society when we talk about the uncontacted tribes of the Amazon, that we did kind of collectively say that, this knowledge may unravel your society in ways that may not be good for you. And so we're just going to kind of let you be with your kind of sticks and stones because that's the most ethical thing to do. And if it's ethical to do with grandma and the uncontacted tribes, then it also applies to like people in this religious space too, and there's a complexity there that I feel like we at least were touching on in the conversation.
We still can't help but fly our drones over though.
Yeah. And I look at those pictures because I'm curious. I know.
We're not exactly hands off.
No, we're not. But, human beings are curious. I think that's all I had in my notes. But yeah, really, really interesting conversation. I feel like he was touching on a lot of things that you and I talk about. So at least we feel like we're not alone in thinking that atheism and religion are just more complex than I think both sides are giving it, which is the space that we both like to hang out.
Yeah, when he was talking about consciousness being perhaps fundamental to the universe, he had a little bit of, you could see it in his face, he had a little bit of worry that we were going to come down on him, right? And he just didn't.
And we're like, we're there, yeah.
During this conversation. So anyway, I thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, our next conversation I'm really excited for. She's a professor of religion, Liz Bukhar, a published author, and she does something that I feel like people have asked me since my book, if there was anything I could go back and change, what would it be? And it would be incorporating her work. Like her focus is how to steal from religion ethically without losing the guardrails in place. And it's super interesting and relevant to the conversation because she really talks about this concept of like, if you try to take meditation out of the history of Buddhism and put it in an app and we're just stealing the good things of religion, which you and I talk about. And then she'll talk about, but if you do it without some ethical guardrails, then it just becomes like meditation to make you more productive in a capitalistic society, which is so antithetical to what meditation was in a Buddhist context. So she really dials down on how to steal from religion in ethical ways. And it's going to be a fantastic conversation. I'm really excited. So
I feel like I'm going to be challenged in that. I do want to say though, by the way, please subscribe and please check out the other content that we're creating. This is the way that that you get to be reminded that we've got an episode coming out or something new has hit the social media platform, whether it be YouTube or other places. So please do hit that like button.
Yeah. And let us know how this conversation went for you and what you liked and didn't like and other ideas for content and guests. And we'll keep plugging along here. But yeah, let us know as these are our first kind of interviews that we're doing together. So give us some feedback below. And that's it for me. Anything from you, Bill?
No, that's it for me as well.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a good week.
Take it easy.
You've been listening to Britt Hartley of No Nonsense Spirituality.
And Bill Reel from the Almost Awakened podcast.
Together, we explore what it means to grow beyond belief systems and find meaning after deconstruction and outside of religion.
Britt has a master's degree in theology with a focus on the future of American religion and works as an atheist spiritual director, helping people navigate life beyond faith.
And Bill is a somatic trauma-informed coach and certified leader holding a level 7 diploma in strategic management and leadership. He helps people through faith transitions, deconstruction, and personal growth.
You can find Britt's courses, coaching, and her best-selling book, No Nonsense Spirituality, all the tools, no belief required, at nononsensespirituality.com.
And you can find Bill's coaching, support groups, and podcasts at awakenandthrive.org, resources designed to help you awaken and thrive in the second half of life.
Thanks for listening. Stay curious, stay open, and keep awakening. No nonsense required.